The real function of the Vidūṣaka is actually to break the rules. So he becomes a comic figure, because that's the only way we can tolerate him. You see? But at the same time, we put him next to the king. And sometimes it's very clear that the king and he has a very special relationship. The relationship between laughter and negative emotions. What is the function of laughter? It says people, ordinary people, have a lot of negative emotions which they cannot express in public, which can ruin our health. Because there is a very close relationship between the emotions and health. We have to laugh.
Namaste, I am Prachand Praveer and I'm talking to Dr. Sunthar Visuvalingam today. Research is based out of Chicago. Dr. Sundar, very welcome to India. And let's continue with our second session. Sir, you mentioned 4 points about Abhinavagupta's conception of humor and how Hāsyābhāsa. So could you just elaborate on the point like how Hāsya can be its own semblance? Isn't it the self-contradictory? Is it like self-parody, like some actor trying to be himself, become very funny, but is it like a lesser degree of funny, or what is it that Abhinavagupta is trying to say when he says the Hāsya its own semblance?
Well, basically, so this is actually, it seems very self-contradictory if you take it at face value. And Abhinavagupta himself is a great logician. He's a master of Vyakarana, Tarka. In fact, his whole philosophy is arguing with the Buddhist logic, you know, with the Buddhist Tarkikas. So it's very... So for him to say something like this, there must be something hidden behind it. Not only he says it, and he doesn't bother to explain, you know. So this is... So let's start. First of all, is it possible for something to be funny and serious at the same time? So somebody can make a point. Well, let's start with very simple, basic level, and then we'll go to what is really hidden. There's a lot hidden behind this statement. So I want to start at the surface and dig deeper. So we have the opposition between, say, oh, be serious, don't joke. You say somebody is joking, or serious. Joking, playing, and then you say, oh, be serious. Okay? Or sometimes you don't be so serious, you know, joke. So seriousness and joking, not funny and being funny, they are normally opposite. But we can think of situations where, suppose I want to make a very serious political point. Okay? So I can say openly, oh, you know, I can criticize some policy, or I can criticize some person, some minister or something, and I can criticize. People who don't think like me may want to start immediately arguing with me, or other people. So, you know, the effect may not be so good, so great. If you want to make a very effective point, so why was Voltaire, for example, this French famous Enlightenment philosopher, able to communicate his ideas so strongly, have such an effect on people? Because he used wit. Because when you read to Voltaire, you start laughing. Even if you, not just Voltaire, other people also, very witty people. Even if you don't agree with them, you say, oh, it's so funny, you know, it's so witty, it's so insightful. Then you think, oh, do I agree with him or not? But, so this is there. So, something very serious being conveyed through a joke. So it is possible to make a serious point in a joking manner. This is what is called wit. Wit. See? Unlike slapstick comedy, Charlie Chaplin, all of that, this is different wit. It's very subtle, very intellectual wit. Abhinavagupta, this is the third point. And actually he's preparing this third point he's making in relation actually to prepare you for the fourth point. And what is the fourth point? He says that the Vidūṣaka also in this way deploys the semblance of Hāsya.
Sir,
So he is actually preparing. So this is what is really at the back of his mind. Yeah, you wanted to ask.
I just wanted to give you a little more context about Vidūṣaka. Does it mean clown or does it have something more to it?
Exactly. This is the question. I'm just going to immediately, I was just going to talk about it.
Yeah.
You see, my thesis reacts to a number of people.
Yeah.
So the immediate, just before my thesis, and he was one of my examiner, was a Dutch scholar. The Dutch scholar is a Vedic scholar. His name is F.B.J. Kuiper, who was a very famous top authority on Vedic religion and also in theatre. So I think in 1979 or so, he had just written this book called Varuna and Vidūṣaka. So Varuna and Vidūṣaka on the origin of the Sanskrit drama.
Okay.
The origin of Sanskrit. So what he shows in this book, and he's actually talking about the Vidūṣaka, but he's actually talking also about the theatre. And he wants to show that in the origin, the theatre is very related to Vedic ritual.
Okay.
And that we know because Bharata himself says it's like a yajna, you know. They have taken from the 4 Vedas and then they have made this theatre. So this is very tied up with the question of the relationship between ritual and theatre.
Okay.
So aesthetics and ritual, religion. So if you look at the Vidūṣaka, already before many people have criticized the Vidūṣaka. If you look at any play, even Kalidasa. So Kalidasa is supposed to be a very great poet. But then you see the jokes, the depiction of the Vidūṣaka is stereotypical. All the plays, a lot of the jokes are about his modakas. In all the plays, he's
even in the Bhashanata, in the Swapnavasa,
everywhere there's modakas.
Yeah.
And then there is a crooked stick.
Yes.
And then some places, many of the plays is compared to a monkey.
Yeah.
Even in so a lot of people, you know, people here just like they admire a lot of Western literature and movies, and so all of us admire Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And the greatest clowns are found where? In Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
So there are many writers about Indian theatre even before. So there's one guy called Indushekhara. He's written The Decline of Sanskrit Theatre. And you know, why these Sanskrit playwrights, you know, they cannot come up with better humor. At least half of Shakespeare would be good, you know. Half as good as Shakespeare, at least something. But they're making the same jokes, silly jokes. So why can't they come up with a better clown? Because all taking the Vidūṣaka as a clown. Why can't we have like, or jester? Why can't we have like King Lear, you know, Shakespeare's jester? So they're already criticizing. Decline. But the problem, if you say decline, it means at one point it was good and then it declined.
Yeah.
But you see Kalidasa as Vidūṣaka, they are all already like that.
Yes.
There's a big problem. This is one thing which I already was thinking to myself, you know, when I was working. Why this such poor? So you can say maybe when Abhinavagupta says Hāsyābhāsa, maybe he means the jokes in Sanskrit theatre are so bad. The semblance is not good humor. So Vidūṣaka also is not good humor. So I was talking to some of my other scholars.
Yeah, this is what
this is maybe you can understand. So this at first I thought maybe he means this, but then he's not meaning this. There's something more serious, because in that case he would say he doesn't want to say all these Sanskrit dramas are bad. He's actually defending them. He's defending this Indian theatre. So Bharata himself prescribes many of these things for the Vidūṣaka. So actually I raised this question in my thesis. Hāsyābhāsa, does it mean that this is bad humor?
Yeah.
Only people with poor sense of humor will laugh at these jokes, which is also, it's just there, which is not because the people who laugh at the most at the Vidūṣaka are all these people who are like slapstick women, children. He's doing all kind of slapstick things. They laugh. So that is there, but it is not enough to explain what he's saying. So coming back to Kuiper, so just before I wrote about it, he had written an important book. It's considered his magnum opus, Varuna and Vidūṣaka on the origin of Sanskrit. So what he does is he sees the description of the Vidūṣaka in the Natya Shastra. So in the Natya Shastra, the Vidūṣaka is described very great detail as a very ugly, deformed person.
Okay.
He's a Brahmin.
Okay.
He's a Brahmin, but he's deformed.
Okay.
He has long fingernails, his eyes are red, he is bald. So a lot of details. He's deformed in many, hunchbacked, etc. So in the actual Sanskrit drama later on, many of these features have been lost, but the original description of Vidūṣaka is very detailed. And then what he saw, he looked at the Brahmana literature, and then he found a figure, a ritual figure, who's also a Brahmin. Because one of the problems of Vidūṣaka, why is he always a Brahmin? You know, he's always called sometimes great Brahmin, mahābrāhmaṇa. He's
Okay.
called in the place. On all the places, called mahābrāhmaṇa. As a ridiculing him, you see. So he found a figure in the Vedic ritual called the Jumbaka. So this Jumbaka plays a very important role in the Ashwamedha ritual. And the description of this Jumbaka is very close to the description of the Vidūṣaka in the Natya Shastra. And in this Jumbaka, what is the role of the Jumbaka? During the Ashwamedha, the king performs a horse sacrifice.
Yeah.
He gets the Diksha. He becomes very impure. He becomes very impure. See, we are now going from laughter and the comic to religion. And then we need to make this link clearer. That is why, it may seem like we are digressing from laughter.
Yeah.
But so this Jumbaka, after the Diksha, the king who has performed the horse sacrifice, Ashwamedha, at the end he transfers all his evil and his impurity to the Jumbaka. The Jumbaka stands in a pool of water. It's a Brahmin. And it says that even that this Brahmin has to come from the Atreya clan, Atri clan of one particular Brahmin clan is specifically mentioned. Transposes this evil to this king, and after from the king to the Jumbaka, so it's like a scapegoat, scapegoat taking on the evil, and then all the people also who are attending this sacrifice, they also jump into the water, they are also purified. So it's kind of a purification ceremony, and the role of that Jumbaka is to take on the impurity of the king. And what is very interesting is that this Jumbaka actually represents the Vedic god Varuna.
Okay.
He's a very important Vedic god.
Okay.
Along with Indra, he's the most important Vedic god.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
And in the Sanskrit thing also, in the Sanskrit theatre, if you look at the Purva Ranga, he demonstrates that the Vidūṣaka is actually representing Varuna.
Oh.
So you see the connection?
Yeah.
Jumbaka in the ritual he is deformed. And in the Purva Ranga, which is a ritual, it is not aesthetic in the normal sense. The Purva Ranga is actually a cosmogonic ritual. The creation of the cosmos, they are doing it in the Purva Ranga. The Vidūṣaka and the two other figures. There's one representing Brahma, one representing Varuna, one representing Indra. So what he's saying is that the ritual origin of the Vidūṣaka, of the Sanskrit theatre. So what he's saying is that originally, according to Kuiper, originally this Vidūṣaka was a ritual figure. Not a funny figure. He was not a clown. See, you asked me, is he a clown or not? Is he funny or not? He was originally not a clown. He was a scapegoat. Taking on the sins of the king. It's a very important ritual function. And later on, in Sanskrit theatre, people misunderstood. They lost sight. They forgot about this original ritual function and made him into a clown. He became a clown. So I said to myself, partly because I'm Indian and I have a lot of respect for all the Indian theorists, the dramatists from Bharata. So I said, how is this possible? I was right from the beginning, I found it difficult to believe. But then now when I saw this, what Abhinavagupta said, then I asked myself this question. Okay, let's assume that the Vidūṣaka is playing a ritual role. But maybe he's at the same time a clown. Is it possible? So maybe behind this clown is making people laugh. There is a very deep ritual role. Because the Indians don't separate ritual from aesthetics and all. For them all it's like a holistic view. So I asked myself, is it possible for the Vidūṣaka to be both a clown and more than a clown? So can Kuiper be right? And at the same time, could it be possible that these the reason why Kalidasa and all these other playwrights, they have followed this same way of depicting the Vidūṣaka because they understood, not because they didn't understand, because they understood what the Vidūṣaka's real ritual role is. Behind the theatre, behind the aesthetics of the theatre, behind the laughter, there is some deep ritual function the Vidūṣaka is playing. So what is this ritual function? Whereby he can be both a clown and something more than a clown.
Maybe.
So this is what started a completely new track of things. So maybe this is what Abhinavagupta means when he says that. See, he doesn't say that the Vidūṣaka is not funny.
Yeah.
He says that the Vidūṣaka deploys the semblance of humor.
Yeah.
So there is something there which is more than humor, which seems like humor, but which is deeper than humor. But at the same time, the semblance of humor also becomes humor. You see now how the last two statements fit together?
Yeah.
So the Vidūṣaka is funny for everybody, most people, but at the same time there is something very deep, deeper function, non-funny function, non-humorous function behind the Vidūṣaka.
Maybe.
So this is what then started my whole work on ritual clowning. Because this phenomenon of clowns who are also priests or very sacred clowns. And if you look at the Vidūṣaka, the description in Natya Shastra, he's a very sacred figure. So how did he become a clown? So that started a completely... See, this Abhinavagupta's last two statements, I gave 4 statements.
Yeah.
So far I've been talking about psychology, aesthetics, humor, structure and all. But it took me into a completely different domain of comparative religion and anthropology of clowning. Yes.
That's why Vidūṣaka becomes like a king's rescuer, friend, a scapegoat, all into one.
All into one.
All into one, like that's happened with Humour, even now Swapna Vasudhatta. He's makes this idea that the house of Vasudhatta will be again united to the king.
So why is the king so attached to the Vidūṣaka? You know, the Vidūṣaka is always like a fool.
Yeah.
So this problem is also in medieval Europe. Okay. You see, the king will always have a jester. Sometimes the guy may even be a dwarf.
Yeah.
There may be an African guy too, you know, slave. But then he has so much of liberties. He can insult the king. So the only person who can talk to the king, like an equal or even more than an equal king, even when he insults the king is like deferential to him. So like in one of the plays, you know, Avimaraka, it's a play by Basa. So when the king is saying, the king without the Vidūṣaka, he's like very unhappy, misses. He's this constant opinion. Says, so he praises the king, Vidūṣaka, saying he's this. Then he says that I cannot be without it. Then what he says, the highest, says, Dvida vibhaktam khalume shariram. It is like my body split in two, the king is saying. The Vidūṣaka is the other half of my own body. So this is a thing in the in medieval Europe also, in the king's two bodies. King is a profane figure, is also a sacred figure, and the sacred figure is very tied up with the clown. So there is a very deep ritual function in the Vidūṣaka. It's very clear because if you look at the Natya Shastra, every say the hero, the Nayaka, he is presided over by Indra. The Nayika by Saraswati, Indrani Saraswati. So who is the person who is presiding over the Vidūṣaka? Omkara.
Omkara. Oh my God.
So see, Omkara is the most sacred syllable in the Upanishad, in the Vedas.
Yes.
And this fool, this clown, he is under the presided by Omkara. And then he always carries a crooked stick. It's called the Kutilaka. And it's always carried in the left hand. It says very clearly, left hand, and you see that in the place. And he will do all kinds of funny things. He will start attacking the women with the thing, or he'll attack some birds with this crooked stick. What does this crooked stick mean? But where did he get this crooked stick? The crooked stick is the present of Brahma to the theatre.
Oh.
See? So this Vidūṣaka is always called mahābrāhmaṇa.
Okay.
Not just Brahmana, he's called a great Brahmin.
mahābrāhmaṇa.
Mahabharata. He always said like a joke, ridiculing him. You know, like who's the mahābrāhmaṇa in Benares? The mahābrāhmaṇa is the guy who takes on the funeral ritual. You know?
Yes.
Mahābrāhmaṇa is a kind of priest
Yeah.
who takes on the impurity of the dead person.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's why when you go to perform the funeral. So it's like a derogatory remark. Sometimes the mahābrāhmaṇa means like Chandala.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so this is the thing. So there is very clear, there is deep ritual ideas behind the Vidūṣaka. The question is how to explain them. Then normally, see, and the thing is this, with the sacred, we normally think of the sacred as something very serious. When you go to temple, you don't joke, you're serious, bhakti.
Yeah.
You know, if any
Yes.
rasa, I think attitude is bhakti.
Yes.
Or you're meditating.
Yeah.
If you are laughing, then that is outside the religious side. You know, when you go back and you are playing with your kids or when you're talking with your friends, when you get drunk, you laugh and joke. It is something outside of religion, of spiritual practice. So, how is it possible for laughter, humor to be part of a sacred figure? So this is the whole question now becomes very different. We started off with psychology, aesthetics. Now we are going into religion. Now, so I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
How can the Vidūṣaka be both funny and laughter, and he's the main person for laughter. At the same time, he's a very sacred figure. So, is there something similar? Is there something similar outside of the theatre?
Yeah.
Let me go outside the theatre and look. If there is a religious reason for this, so it's a ritual reason for this, then maybe it should be there outside of the theatre and outside of aesthetic. So then I started looking at the Pāśupata aesthetic.
Okay.
Pāśupata.
Yeah.
So, like, do you know anything about Pāśupata sadhana?
No, I do not know, sir.
So, these Pāśupatas, they are worshippers of Rudra Shiva.
Yeah.
And their sadhana is very interesting. They worship Rudra Shiva. The idea is to become one with Rudra Shiva. But they have to laugh very loudly. Because Shiva laughs very loudly. Aṭṭahāsa. Similarly, in the theatre, the Vidūṣaka is atihāsa. They don't use the word Aṭṭahāsa, they use the word atihāsa.
So, atihāsa is the same as Aṭṭahāsa.
Yes, because also it's an explosive form of laughter. Aṭṭahāsa is always used with regard to Shiva, but it is also atihāsa. Because it is laughing but very explosive laughter.
But Aṭṭahāsa is typically
it's even frightening.
Yeah, to demons and for Rudra
and
for
Rudra also.
Okay, Rudra.
So the Pāśupata had to do certain sadhana and he had to do Aṭṭahāsa.
Okay.
And not only that, Aṭṭahāsa, part of his sadhana is to make people laugh.
Oh my goodness.
That is part of the sadhana. So he used to make people laugh and make people abuse him.
Oh my goodness.
So another part of his sadhana is Shringarana. See the word Shringara?
Yeah.
Where is this word Shringara coming from? See, the word Shringara in Natya Shastra is very interesting. What is the etymology of Shringara? So anyway, Shringarana.
String is a horn.
Horn. Have you heard this word horny?
Yeah.
I know. This is very relevant because in every culture, not just in India, the word horn and horn, it has very similar. You can see parallel. So this Pāśupata, one of his sadhana, is very interesting. He has to go near a woman. He has to keep a distance from women. But at the same time, he had to be near the women and start acting as if he's in a very erotic way.
Okay.
Lewd way towards the women. This is part of his sadhana, mind you. So he will get insulted, joke, people may even beat him or throw stones at him. The women will all run away, etc. So this kind of behavior you will see a little bit in the Vidūṣaka also. He is always shown in the dramas getting into fights with the maids.
Okay.
Sometimes the women beat him up also.
Okay.
In some of the plays,
Yeah.
the dasis.
Yeah.
He will abuse them, very vulgar language.
Yeah.
Dasya Putri
Yeah.
uses this kind of very vulgar, even obscene language.
Yeah.
And the Natya Shastra says, this was very interesting. Why does the Natya Shastra say here Ashlila Bhasha?
Okay.
Shlila means obscene.
Yeah.
Just use obscene speech.
Yeah.
Similarly, the Vidūṣaka, the Pāśupata had to use obscene. And it's not just in India, in Greece.
Yeah.
They have similar group, cynics.
Mm-hmm.
And people have compared the cynics to the Pāśupatas.
Okay.
But these people are doing sadhana.
Okay.
It is important. And during the Lakulisha Pāśupatas, they're all Brahmins on top of that, you see. So you see there is some parallel outside the theatre to look at the theatre. What I want to say is, Kuiper said that the Vidūṣaka is a scapegoat.
Yeah.
He's taking on the sins.
Mm-hmm.
And this Jumbaka also takes about the sin. But when I looked at this, I said that scapegoat function is not enough to explain humor and the laughter and atihāsa. So basically, my main theory of the Vidūṣaka, the clown, and I've compared him with ritual clowns in other cultures, many other cultures, especially in South America, Europe, etc., is that he breaks the rules. When somebody breaks the rules, people laugh. See, even social rules, normally when somebody comes, he doesn't know the etiquette, he uses a fork in the wrong hand and the right, and so fork and spoon, and so what kind of this guy, no refinement. So you break the rules, you don't know how social norms are. You're coming back to Bergson's theory actually.
Yeah.
When you involuntarily break the rules, people laugh.
Yeah.
But this clown, is actually breaking, this Vidūṣaka, or these people like the Pāśupata, is purposely, deliberately breaking the rules for his sadhana.
Okay.
So this is a very different understanding of the sacred. Normally sacred figures, they are following the rules. See, there are rules about do's and don't do, do's and don'ts. Then you follow the rules. You are ascetic, you control the senses. You behave in a very restrained way. And then you have a kind of form of the sacred where you are breaking all the rules.
Yeah.
Say like in Holi.
Yeah.
Is Holi a religious festival or not? Holi. See, Holi, you are breaking all the rules. You have to break the rules. Even in normally you don't break the rules. In Holi you break the rule and people have to tolerate it. And if you see when the Vidūṣaka does all these silly things in the theatre, it is during the Vasantotsava.
Okay.
When he is playing with these women and all of that, it is during the Vasantotsava. You will find very often in many of the plays, it is mentioned the Vasantotsava and the Vidūṣaka is playing a role in the Vasantotsava. What is Vasantotsava? It is
It's a holy. Yeah.
Right? So I'm just trying to show you that behind the small question of laughter and humor, there is a big hidden universe behind it.
Yeah.
So I started with Abhinavagupta's conception of humor.
Yeah.
But the second part of the title of my thesis is its resonances in Sanskrit drama, poetry, Hindu mythology, and spiritual praxis.
Yeah.
So you see, through laughter and humor, I'm getting a handle on the whole of the Hindu universe, the symbolic aspect. I just gave a talk last month, end of November in Mumbai, on the esoteric meaning of Ganesha.
Okay.
It's there on YouTube.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to show is the same ideas in the Vidūṣaka also appear in Ganesha.
Okay.
And Ganesha is a sacred figure, but these are all hidden.
Yeah.
And then I went into the tantric aspects, hidden tantric aspects of Ganesha. You see, the Ganesha has a crooked trunk.
Yes.
So I actually compared it with the crooked stick. So there are a lot of parallels. Ganesha has modakas. Right now I talked about Pāśupatas. Ganesha has always, you worship him by giving him modakas. In all the places, the Vidūṣaka is very hungry for modakas, specifically for modakas. Ganesha has a big belly. It's even called Mahodara, Lambodara. Similarly, the Vidūṣaka, one of the places is called even Mahodara. He's always hungry, you have to give him food. He's always talking about food. So there is hidden ritual ideas, not just in one place, but all over, if you look for them. So we are getting into an understanding of the sacred, which is very different from the normal way of understanding the sacred, which is there in India, which is there also in other cultures. So this is what I call transgressive sacrality. In the sacred, there's one side of the sacred which everybody knows about and practices, where you follow the rules. Not just you follow the rules more strictly than ordinary people.
Yeah.
So this is called interdictory sacrality. Interdiction. The rules, you follow the rules. The rules are the interdictions. Okay? Control your senses, meditate, turn your mind inward, etc., etc. And which is serious. There's no place for laughter in this side of the sacred. But then there is another side of the sacred, which is very related, which are related. The two are not unrelated, where you break the rules. So you have like festivals like Holi, like Carnival. In Europe also you had Carnival, where they used to break all the rules. The same Christians who are observing the rules during the year, and during this particular period of the year for about several weeks, they start breaking all the rules. So this famous theoretician called Mikhail Bakhtin, who has worked on, he's a very influential thinker on theatre and all of that, on Carnival. So there is this other side of the sacred which is based on breaking the rules. And this aspect of the sacred, this transgressive sacred, is very tied up with. So my critique of Kuiper was to say that the real function of the Vidūṣaka is actually to break the rules. And he is keeping, and he is, but because in the theatre, it is a public theatre, you cannot say this. This is why also Abhinavagupta doesn't explain what he says, because this is the esoteric side of the theatre. So he becomes a comic figure, because that's the only way we can tolerate him. You see? But at the same time, we put him next to the king. And sometimes it's very clear that the king and he has a very special relationship. See? So, so this is basically the theory of the Vidūṣaka which I have. He becomes a clown because he breaks the rules. And this is true in other cultures, and that's what we will come to when we talk about Levi-Strauss.
Yeah, but it's very interesting, this idea of breaking the rules. I believe that like following the rules are prevalent in the Vedic tradition, but in Tantric tradition, especially in Vamachar and all, there's always some way of breaking rules and doing something which is looks very awkward. And but anyway, I'm not going to that will be digression. But coming back to sir, your idea, your key notion that you have displayed in your PhD, which we talked in the earlier session, about bridging this Abhinavagupta with Gurdjieff, especially you resort to Arthur Koestler, and you say I have certain main kind of connection with this Gurdjieff and Abhinavagupta. So why have you done it? What is that kind of link or bridge or connection do you see here?
So basically, with regard to Gurdjieff, I gave just the basic structure that in other emotions, the other bhavas and rasas, the reaction, when we react, stimulus and reaction, right? Stimulus, organism, reaction. That is the psychological model. Stimulus, it affects the organism, and then the organism, there is a reaction. So it is either positive or negative. It is either yes, or yes, yes, I think, or no. This no can be angry, oh no, oh no, I've run away, so yes or no. So, but in the case of humor, it is a structure. So there's yes and no, same time, yes and no. So it gets cancelled and it becomes laughter. So this is Gurdjieff's basic insight, And it is actually done in the context of the body and, laughter. What is the role of laughter in the spiritual life and this and that. So that is good. So what Koestler does, he has a very similar theory and he calls it bisociation.
Okay.
So where does the word bisociation come from? It is a modification of the word association. So when you see, when there is a stimulus, it is always comes in a certain psychological field, a field of associations. It is these associations which are all in the vibhava. There's not just the main vibhava, there's all kinds of secondary vibhavas and all of that. So there's a whole field of associations which are stirred up in the sahridaya. And it is these associations which nourish the particular emotion or the rasa. But what happens in wit and humor, according to Koestler, is the same stimulus, you see how it is connected with Gurdjieff, the same stimulus, simultaneously it is putting your mind on two different tracks, two different sets of associations. That's why bi meaning two, bisociation. So there's one set of associations which are very negatively oriented, no. Another set of associations which are positively oriented, and these two set of associations clash. They clash. They cannot be reconciled. And this is the kind of situation where people start to smile or they laugh. And they laugh. So this is the mechanism behind laughter. It's a kind of a nervous paralysis. See, normally when you have a positive or a negative reaction, even if you don't do anything physically with your body is already preparing itself for action, Your nervous system is being mobilized. But this mobilization is paralyzed in the case of this bisociation.
So is it Artha Koestler theory or is it your own theory as the bisociation theory? What is the essence of your own theory here?
But the thing is, in the case of Koestler, what I say is very influenced by both Koestler and Gurdjieff.
Okay.
So in the case of Koestler, what he actually, the way he develops his theory is that we first have, so in a joke or something like that, we have one field of association. So the mind is going on one track.
Okay.
Suddenly a new set of associations completely contradicting this set of associations is brought into play. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the mind suddenly, it's like a train going like this, suddenly it goes off track.
Okay.
It's derailed by this new set of association. So that is how he tends to describe bisociation. So what I am saying is, and this is coming more from my reading of Gurdjieff and all, there are many situations where this happens. First of all, there is one field of associative field, as he puts it, which is brought up, and then suddenly it is ruptured, broken, goes off track. And then a new field, contradictory field, and then you have the humor coming from that. Many jokes are structured. This is what is called the punchline.
Yeah.
When you say punchline, this is where the punchline is coming from an unexpected way. But basically, what I do is I take Koestler and I put him inside my own. I don't reject. Put that inside. So this is just one way of developing this bisociative. The other is simultaneously both yes and no.
Okay.
See? And so because Koestler is more interested in wit.
Okay.
The intellectual aspects of humor. Because his two books, one called Insight and Outlook and the other called The Act of Creation, are more interested in creativity. And what he shows, and this is true, in creativity, modern studies on creativity, even Jugad in the Indian context, the notion of being creative, Indian
kind
form
of management and all.
In the case of lack of resources and still you are creative and you find solutions.
Yeah.
So Koestler is actually more interested in the act of creation, in creativity.
Okay.
So for him, this creativity comes about when the mind makes connections between completely different fields.
Okay.
That's how new ideas, new inventions, everything come about. When a person, creative person, he makes connections which other people don't see. And humor, in laughter, in bisociation, you are making the same kind of connections.
Okay.
But only in this case, it's coming out as funny, as a joke. But you see the similarity?
I see.
So that's why, so Koestler is primarily interested in creativity, and so the bisociation is what links humor with creativity. So this is where he's coming from. Whereas Gurdjieff is coming not so much from this perspective of creativity, from the perspective of the role of laughter in spiritual life and this and that. And so what I do in my thesis is actually I provide a framework, because Gurdjieff doesn't talk about bisociation, associative fields and all of that. And Koestler doesn't talk so much about the physiology. So what I do is I come up with a theory which takes stuff from Gurdjieff, which takes stuff from Koestler, etc. But ultimately it's like trying to come up with this big cross-cultural theory of humor and laughter. So in my way of looking at things, there are a lot of implications and insights which you will not get from just Koestler alone or Gurdjieff alone. So when we go to, for example, Levi-Strauss and Bergson and all that will become clearer.
Before coming to Bergson, and I'd just like to understand that, look, we have discussed earlier about, like, there are three prevalent theories about humor, as we know. One is the superiority theory, one is incongruity theory, and one is the relief theory. Let's first discuss this superiority theory, because it's mentioned by Abhinav himself that man basically thinks himself superior to others, and therefore he laughs. And before coming to Hāsya, it's when he describes the stable emotion,
Yes.
in his Thai bhav, he mentioned this.
Yes.
So how do you know, which I think is the same as the superiority theory, or is it different? Could you just like to throw light more on the superiority theory, and how do you see it?
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, so how does the superiority theory fit into the bisociation? This has very much to do with this notion of tanmayi bhavana, identification.
Okay.
So I said, like, to have a rasa or something, you have to identify with the ashraya.
Yeah.
So like when Rama
Yeah.
sees Sita
Yeah.
and is feeling the feeling of love, so we enjoy this love through identification with Rama.
Yeah.
We don't directly react to Sita.
Yeah.
This is very important. In real life, when you see a woman, you are reacting directly to the woman, her beauty and all.
Yeah.
In the theatre, we are perceiving Sita through the eyes of Rama.
Okay.
So that means we are actually identifying with Rama. Tanmayi Bhavana.
Okay.
All the different people are there. So now you have, so I actually discussed this in my thesis, small portion, superiority theory. So what happens when there is a bisociation? What happens when somebody, when the ashraya is looking at things from two different perspectives?
Yeah.
So what happens here, you see, when somebody makes a racist joke, when we laugh, we are feeling superior. So why do we say that somebody is a butt of a joke? You know the word butt, B-U-T-T. It's a target of a joke.
Yeah.
So you can laugh with somebody or laugh at somebody.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So let's suppose you are a racist.
Yeah.
Let's suppose you are a racist. I think it's better, it'll be clearer when I give you an example. You are a racist.
Yeah.
And that guy is a Jew.
Okay.
But if you say something bad about Jews, then they will say you are an anti-Semitic, you are an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And or you are a misogynist. You want to make a joke that it's a woman. You want to. And if you say directly, oh, you know, women they are like this, like, so you are misogynist. But if you make a joke which has this kind of bisociative structure, so half of the joke, in this bisociation, there are two association fields. So one association field is actually presupposes this kind of racist bias. Racist or misogynist or class or foreigner bias, anti-foreigner bias. So one association is using some kind of stereotypical thinking about somebody who is considered inferior. See how this okay. At the same time, instead of saying it like that, you make a joke where the other half of the joke is such witty and so appealing that people, without thinking, they immediately laugh at the joke because it's so witty. So I am not a racist. You make this joke about that woman. So I don't share your kind, or you make a joke about Jews, and I don't share your opinion about Jews. But because this field is, because the other half of that associative field is a bisociation, two associations, two opposite fields of association. The other field sucks me in, and this field I have, and I can't just take that. To laugh, I have to take both at the same time. When I laugh, and you make the joke, it's all based on the inferiority of the person who is the butt of the joke. So you see how the superiority comes in and how it is tied up with the bisociation. Joke at the expense of, see, I made a joke at the expense of somebody else. So I am laughing with you, but at him or at her. So that is just briefly how it fits in. If you read my thesis, it goes into, it shows some diagrams also, how this identification works.
Very nicely put, sir. So let's come to a little bit on the Freud conception of humor. Like Freud typically says that it's a kind of relief theory where is the humor lends itself to the expression of negative emotion such as aggression, disgust, fear, and sorrow. So now, how do you take up this idea?
So this is very related to just what we were talking about. Wit, for the title of the Freud's book is Wit and its Relationship to the Unconscious. It's also very related to what we were talking earlier about breaking the rules. How breaking the rules result in laughter. You see? It's very related because all of us have very unconscious tendencies, whether with sex or violence. And when I'm talking about racist joke, it's ultimately violence. It's a form of verbal violence. Only if you say it like that, people will raise objections. But you put it in a joke, it's kind of disguised by. So basically, what Freud is saying is, we have all the emotions which are coming from the unconscious. But normally, if you express this in real social life, it is censored. It is repressed. We have to repress this. We cannot express this in normal social etiquette, etc. You cannot do this. But the only way you can do that is through jokes. So when you make a joke, what is happening is you are giving a kind of you're bypassing. See, we have this censorship is coming inside your own mind. What, like Freud, you call what is called like a superego. The superego is like you have internalized all the moral restrictions of your society, and that becomes a form of internal censorship. So what jokes do is they allow you to express forbidden thoughts, prohibited emotions by temporarily escaping the censorship. So, yes. But you see Bergson, and this is very interesting, but this is Freud, he says, this is a very interesting point. According to Freud, it is to escape censorship, to get beyond the repressed. Okay? But Bergson says exactly the opposite of Freud. So when you read Freud, he gives so many examples of such jokes. Say, for example, dirty jokes, for example. They are a way of expressing sexual, even aggressive feelings, but through a joke. You see? Similarly, racist. So Freud's book is full of Jewish jokes.
But when you say Bergson, now Bergson has a very different idea from Freud.
The opposite idea.
Yeah, opposite idea. Bergson just talks about a lot of things. First of all, he just says that it is the automation. You know, he says clearly that is you only laugh at something live or humans. You do not laugh at mountains and things.
Yes.
You don't laugh at mountains or rivers and all or stone. Or even if you laugh at a stone only because it has certain idea, look like certain human characteristics.
Not at things which are predictable and routine and which are going, that's I say, like on a track.
Yeah.
You're going on a track.
But Bergson clearly outlines this idea with there's a mechanical way, like automation, like absent-mindedness, and then they say no, these become this idea for him for laughter. But Bergson says two very important things. One, he says that for laughter to happen, one must have a moment of anesthesia of heart. Unless you have this kind of momentary anesthesia of your heart, you can't laugh. That is one. And second, he says the positive side of laughter is like social correction.
Yes, exactly. That's the most important thing.
For him, the laughter is something which is social correction is very required, which is like it's not same as like Freud, but rather he says the positive side of it. So now, how do you account for this idea of Bergson idea with your own Bisociation theory?
Okay. See, basically, it's very important. When Bergson outlines laughter as a social corrective, he gives a lot of examples, and you have to agree with him.
Yeah.
When Freud says that laughter is a way of humor is a way of getting across, they're saying the opposite.
Yeah.
You see all his examples, you have to agree with him.
Yeah.
So this is actually proof of my theory. So this social corrective of Bergson is very relevant. I will come back to the anesthesia. I can start with it, but I think I'll come back to that afterwards. The social corrective is very important, and actually Abhinavagupta says exactly the same thing as Bergson 1,000 years ago. Exactly.
Okay.
He says that when the case of Ravana, says when you see Ravana as a Hāsyābhāsa, Sringārabhāsa becomes Hāsya, so people then know you should, and then everybody laughs, so people know that you should not behave like Ravana.
Okay.
Be like Rama, don't be like Ravana.
Okay.
Abhinavagupta says that the abhasa of any rasa becomes Hāsya. Because what he says is, this is one more very important thing, because actually in one sense, Abhinavagupta goes much further than Bergson, and not only that, he actually develops his idea in a way which is very relevant to the Indian ethical context. Because, you see, Bergson generally, because he's Frenchman, he's a modern thinker, so he's just talking about right and wrong in a very general sense. But Abhinavagupta, he is very interested in the Purushartha theory.
Yeah.
Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha.
Yeah.
And how the rasas are related to these four.
Yeah.
So what he shows there is a close relationship.
Yeah.
See, how are aesthetics and ethics related? And how does humor and laughter come into this schema of aesthetics? So the way aesthetics and ethics are related is that these rasas are naturally related to the Purusharthas. So Sringara is related to Kama.
Yeah.
Artha
is
Raudra. Why? Because even when you are not violent, actually, competition.
Yeah,
competition is a form of aggression. Artha.
Yeah.
So like the Artha Shastra, what is it? It's about kings and their politics and how to defeat.
The idea of acquiring something.
You want to acquire something, there is competition.
Yes.
So this is inevitable. So you say in Hindu tradition, we never say that competition is bad. Artha is not bad. There has to be a higher principle, but so Artha is related to Raudra, aggressivity. I wouldn't say anger, but aggressivity. However subtle. And then there is Utsaha. If you want to high undertaking, like Rama building the bridge, Setubandha, it's Utsaha. So if you want to undertake something, then you need to discipline yourself and social dharma.
Yeah, this is the
You
idea.
got to uphold dharma. You need utsaha.
Yeah.
See, dharma and moksha are very different. Moksha is introverted, turning away from the world.
And
So dharma, you have to apply your energies in a very structured and targeted and disciplined way.
Moksha is related to vibhatsa and jugupsa. And
So moksha is actually related to bibhatsa because, Arjuna in one sense, and then later on, Shanta,
Yeah.
So for Abhinavagupta, then these four, the principal Purushartha, principal rasas, Sringara, Raudra, Utsaha, Veera, that is Veera rasa, Veera and Dharma, and Bibhatsa have to be depicted in such a way as to promote the four Purusharthas. Each one corresponds to one of the Purusharthas. So it's a parallel. So what about humor and laughter? It's a secondary emotion. And you will see there's really a very deep logic in the way Abhinavagupta thinks. The reason why he says the semblance of any rasa can become laughter, he wants to show that by depicting any rasa in an anti-Purushartha way, it becomes laughter. So if you present Ravana, Sringara, Abhasa of Sringara, then people will say, oh, I should not follow Sringara, I should not pursue Kama in this way.
Okay.
If you show anger or aggressivity or krodha, anger or heroism in a very negative way, through as mere semblance, the people know you should not pursue that Purushartha in that particular that way. And I have actually, in the Vrichakatika, I have tried to show the abhasa of all the different emotions, the abhasas of, I have tried to identify how different abhasas of the different emotions are being employed in the Vrichakatika. And how they are actually being used to, because Vrichakatika is like a very comic play, it's a prakarana, it's very worldly play. There's a lot of funny things, all kind of crooks and characters, thief, there is a thief, there's a guy pretending to be a monk, all kinds of prostitute, and all of that. Then there's a bad character. So, there is a bad prince, the hero, Shakara. You will see actually all these abhasas being used in the Vrichakatika to depict how not to follow the Purushartha. So Abhinavagupta is basic insight to use humor, laughter as a corrective. It is the same as Bergson. The central insight is the same, but he develops it into the Purushartha context in India. Now, just quickly before we leave this topic, anesthesia.
Yes.
So this is very interesting because it seems to contradict what I just said. You asked me about superiority humor theory.
Yes.
So I said in superiority, there is a partial identification.
Yes.
There is bisociation. So the field of SO is split in two and we identify partially. See? So there are two ways you can say this. One, you say you are identifying Tanmayi Bhavana with one of the fields. The other way you can say is anesthesia of the heart. It's partial. So you are not identifying with the other.
Okay.
So if somebody falls down, he's walking, somebody is walking and he slips on a banana skin and he falls down and everybody laughs, you can't help laughing, but you feel sorry for that guy. So this is what Bergson means, there's anesthesia. If you just felt, oh, can I help you? You feel very maybe it's your mother fell down, You won't laugh, you immediately go, you rush to help. So you cannot have this anesthesia. If you want to laugh, you must have a certain kind of anesthesia. So Bergson is actually half right.
Okay.
You see how the bisociation, I can say the opposite. I can say you need to also identify in order to have a joke. In a joke, there's also some process of identification involved. But it is half identification. It is half identification and half anesthesia. So it's only because the laughter and humor has this structure that you can say these two opposite things about.
Yeah, that's very nice. Let's talk about come to Freud. Freud mentioned that humor is used to circumvent censorship. So how is that? And do you agree with it?
Yes, I agree with him. I agree with Bergson also. See, I'm able to agree with both
Yeah.
precisely because of this kind of fundamental insight into humor as yes and no. See, so in the Freud case, there is some kind of forbidden emotion, forbidden instinct which is being expressed. We are saying yes
Yeah.
to it. In the case of Bergson, we are saying no to it. But for it to be funny, there must be both yes and no. Do you get the picture? I've tried to simplify really down to the basics.
Somebody said that if we have to compose a society or compose a world, laughter can be left out and then nothing much will be missed. I don't know.
Maybe somebody like Plato, probably.
Yeah, probably Plato.
Probably Plato, somebody like
yeah,
Plato.
Yeah, laughter, nothing we missed. But do you think that laughter is essential to bodily health and immunity? Do you think there's a...
Exactly. So this is very interesting. I did more than one chapter of my book.
Yeah.
I related specifically to the relationship between laughter and negative emotions. And this is why we need to go back to Gurdjieff. I told you that Gurdjieff and Koestler say very similar things, but they are talking about it in a very different context with different purpose in mind. So I mentioned that even in Sanskrit theatre,
Yeah.
the Adama characters,
Yeah.
the low characters,
Yeah.
they are the ones who laugh the most. The high characters don't laugh. Gurdjieff, in this same context, he says, in the Bible, there is no mention, there's not a single mention of Jesus laughing
Yeah.
or even smiling. Why is that?
Yeah.
It's entirely serious, like a tragic story on the cross, this, that, etc. In fact, it doesn't fit into the Bible. If you bring in laughter, it won't fit into the Bible. Similarly, the Buddha. In India, he's never depicted laughing. Even when he is smiling, it's a very spiritual kind of smile, It's not like big grinning or something. It's a smile. It's a kind of spiritual smile, like some kind of inner bliss. That's the best. But when he goes to China, you have all these big laughing Buddhas with a big belly. That is also very related to transgression. I have basically shown. This is because the Buddha is there, becomes like a Taoist figure. And in Taoism, you have this transgressive element. So I won't go into that, but that is it. So then, if that is the case, shouldn't we follow like what you said just now, ban laughter?
Yeah.
It is going against spirituality.
Yeah.
So what Gurdjieff says, and I completely agree with him, and in fact there's a lot of proof, is that he says the relationship between laughter and negative emotions. What is the function of laughter? He says ordinary people, have a lot of negative emotions which they cannot express in public. So in real life, we are having a lot of anger hidden inside us, fear, hidden sorrows, which we cannot express. So all kinds of disgust, all kinds of negative emotions we carry with us, which can ruin our health. Because there is a very close relationship between the emotions and health. So for ordinary people, like you and me, what is the cure? What is the medicine? So we have to laugh.
Yeah.
Laughter is the best medicine.
Yeah.
Like you read Reader's Digest, they have one section called Laughter, the best medicine.
Yeah.
So we need this medicine. Because if we don't laugh,
Yeah.
it will be psychologically very bad, and not just psychologically, physically. So there's a very famous case of this, which everybody talks about. Came to highlight this, and medical people, for example, the US is taken very seriously. There's somebody called Norman Cousins. I don't know. Norman Cousins. He's the editor of a famous magazine. I think it's called the Saturday Review.
Yeah.
A very well-known person, household name.
Yeah.
So suddenly he was diagnosed with some very rare disease.
Okay.
Because probably something to do with the lymph or whatever.
Yeah.
So the doctors and all said that this is incurable.
Yeah.
You have probably so many months to live, and you can't be cured. So you're faced with this, what to do? So what it is, okay, I'm going to cure myself.
Yeah.
What it is, he locked himself in a hotel room,
Okay.
and the only thing he did was he started watching all these funny movies, especially Marx.
Okay,
Groucho
Groucho Marx.
Marx Brothers.
Yeah.
So he would spend the whole day watching all these comic.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I don't know about Charlie Chaplin, but anyway, he did
Buster
it.
Keaton,
So for
yeah.
several days, only this.
Yeah.
And he cured himself
Wow.
just by laughing. So what has happened is that
Yeah.
people are so busy, they are so focused on their work,
Yeah.
nowadays people,
Yeah.
like competitive and what,
Yeah.
that they don't realize how much of a psychological burden they are carrying in themselves. They're carrying in themselves in the form of all these negative emotions. So one of the roles of the laughter
Yeah.
is basically to discharge these emotions
Yeah.
before they poison you. But at the same time, what Gurdjieff says, that somebody who is doing spiritual sadhana
Yeah.
and who has transcended these negative emotions, who has already gone beyond feeling emotions like anger and fear and all. So he has managed to go beyond them, transcending them through his sadhana, whichever, Christ, Buddha, etc. They don't need to laugh.
Yeah.
We need to laugh because we have all these negative emotions in us.
Yeah.
But those people don't need to laugh. Pāśupata is a different case because they're coming into a very different kind of sadhana.
That will take up in the next session, sir, more about
Yes.
your thing. I think we have talked a lot, and I'll conclude this
We'll take a
session
break.
now. We'll take a break and we'll continue our discussion in the next session.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.